Hello all you knitters and hookers, and welcome back to Ben's Balls of Yarn. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to do tapestry crochet. I've got a lot of ideas of tapestry crochet coming up next year, so I wanted to show you the basics of it today with this Robin Red Brest design. Just before we get started with the tapestry crochet, I just wanted to say, yes, I am wearing a onesie because I'm filming this on Christmas Day and I'm not getting out of my onesie. Alright, let me bring you a little bit closer up so you can see how to crochet this lovely Robin Red Brest. So here is the tapestry crochet I'm going to be showing you how to do today. I'm actually going to show you 3 ways to do tapestry crochet today, and as we go through them I'll explain the advantages and disadvantages of them and which projects you should use each different way for. This tapestry crochet comes with a free pattern which is available on my Substack, and if you subscribe to my Substack you can get free patterns every week or 2. Link in the description field. So you're going to need 3 colours of yarn. So you want a background colour, which will also be the belly colour of the robin, a colour for the main body of the robin and the legs, and then a red or an orange for the red breast. You're also going to need your trusty 3.5mm crochet hook. So we're going to start off by making a chain in our main colour, and in any of my tapestry crochet patterns that will be coming out, you always want to make the chain as long as the pattern is wide plus 2. This is because all patterns are worked up in half double crochets. So this pattern is 27 stitches wide, so we're going to start by chaining 27 plus 2, which makes 29. Primary school maths. So here is my chain of 29, and if you look at the first row of the pattern, you just have 27 half double crochets along the chain. That's US terminology, by the way. I'm going to work the first half double crochet into the 3rd stitch from the hook, and to give a nice neat edge on the bottom of the work I'm going to be working into the back bar. So to do a half double crochet, yarn over, insert your hook into the back bar of the 3rd stitch, yarn over, pull through a loop, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. Now we want to do 26 more half double crochets till we get to the other end of the chain. I've completed my 27 half double crochets of the first row of the work. Now I'm going to chain 2 and turn the work. Now the second row of this pattern is also just 27 half double crochets in the main colour. We're going to be working our first half double crochet into the 1st stitch. We're not going to count this chain 2 as a stitch. So we want to work 27 more half double crochets starting in this very 1st stitch. Now crochet 26 more half double crochets till you get to the other end of the work. For the next 4 rows I'm going to show you the first way to do tapestry crochet. This way is probably the most traditional way to do tapestry crochet, by which I mean if you YouTube how to do tapestry crochet, this is the method that's going to be shown to you in most YouTube videos. So we have to chain 2, we always chain 2 at the end of the rows, and then we're going to turn the work, and if we look at the pattern you can see that the first 13 stitches of row 3 are in the main colour. So I'm going to half double crochet 13 stitches. On this 13th stitch I haven't yarned over and pulled through the 3 loops, which is the final step of the stitch. When you want to change colour in crochet, you always want to do it in the last yarn over and pull through of the stitch. So if it's a half double crochet, you should have your 3 loops on the hook and then you'll yarn over and pull through to complete the stitch. But instead of doing that in the main colour, we now want to switch to the brown. I'm just going to loop my brown yarn over the hook and then pull that through to complete this stitch. And I'm going to slightly tug on the grey working yarn to make sure that stitch isn't loose. With this way of doing tapestry crochet, what we want to do is always capture the working yarn of the colour we're not currently using. So I'm going to yarn over in my brown and go into the next stitch. I'm also going to make sure the working yarn of the colour I'm not using, which in this case is grey, is going over my hook. I'm going to yarn over and pull a loop of brown yarn through and yarn over and complete the stitch. And now we have trapped this grey yarn in between the work and that stitch. So let's do that again. Yarn over, go into the next stitch, make sure the grey yarn is also going over the hook. I like to hold the yarn at the back of the work with my middle finger, and then yarn over with the brown yarn over and pull through. We now have one more stitch to do in brown, so yarn over, go into the next stitch, capturing that grey yarn at the back, yarn over, and now we need to change back to grey. So I'm just going to drop the brown yarn and pick up the grey yarn. We don't have any more stitches in this row of brown, so I'm not going to carry the brown at the back of the work. I've pulled through a loop in grey. I'm just going to work 11 more half double crochets to get to the end of this row. Okay, I've reached the end of row 3, so we're going to chain 2 as usual and turn the work. Now for row 4, we have to start by crocheting 7 half double crochets in the main colour. So I'm on the 7th half double crochet, but I'm leaving my 3 loops on the hook, and then I'm going to bring my grey yarn to the front of the work. This is because this is the wrong side, and we want to always bring our yarns to the wrong side. And now we're going to pick up the brown yarn. This brown yarn has a little way to travel, and because we're doing the first way of doing tapestry crochet, we don't want to have a long float in the back of the work. So we want to make sure that this yarn that's going to be between this stitch and this stitch is going to be relatively loose so that we can pick it up. We essentially want this yarn to do a little zigzag or staircase, so it's going to go up here, along here, and then up again for the stitch. So we need that much yarn loose. So in order to keep that loose, what I like to do is kind of pinch the yarn between my thumb and middle finger. I always have trouble saying the word thumb, I don't know why. And so we've left it a little bit loose, and yarn over and pull through. So now you can see that it's not too loose, and we can manipulate it into that staircase shape. So we're going to yarn over, and we're going to go into the next stitch, and we're going to not only capture the grey yarn, but also this brown float that we've created, and complete our half double crochet. And the pattern calls for 2 more, so let's do that. Making sure to capture both the grey working yarn and that brown float. And 1 more in brown. Okay, now bring your brown yarn to the front of the work, and another tip with tapestry crochet is that if I were to pick up the grey yarn like this, you can see it's starting to twist. So what I'm actually going to do is bring the brown yarn to the front of the work, but make sure it's going under the grey yarn so that they don't twist. And if you make sure your yarns don't twist every time you pick up or drop a yarn, you're going to be in a lot less trouble. So let's pull through a loop of main coloured yarn to complete this stitch. The next stitch is this grey one here, but this float is still visible, so we need to capture this float as well as the brown working yarn now. And we're capturing the brown working yarn because we still have more brown stitches to do in this row. So we're going to capture both of those and half double crochet. Now we've reached where this brown yarn is coming out of this stitch, so we don't need to capture this float anymore because it's essentially just now becoming part of this stitch. We need to do 1 more main coloured yarn, half double crochet, but we don't want to complete it. We want to bring the grey yarn to the front and pick up the brown yarn and complete the stitch. And we have 1 half double crochet in brown, making sure to capture that main coloured yarn. Bring the brown to the front, going underneath the grey like we did before. Complete that half double crochet stitch. And now, according to my pattern, I have 14 half double crochets in the main coloured yarn to get to the other end. So I'm going to do that without capturing any of the brown. We've now completed row 4. We're going to chain 2 and turn the work as usual. And now we need to do 13 half double crochets in the main coloured yarn until we reach the colour change, so I'll do that quickly. I'm on my 13th half double crochet in the main coloured yarn, and now we need to do 1 half double crochet in brown. So I'm going to drop the grey yarn to the back of the work now. We always want to drop the yarns on the wrong side of the work. We're going to pick up the grey yarn and we're going to do half double crochet into the next stitch, picking up that grey yarn at the back, drop the brown yarn, pick up the grey yarn, complete the half double crochet, and now we're doing 3 half double crochets in the main coloured yarn, making sure to pick up the brown yarn, and now drop the grey yarn, and we're doing 1 half double crochet in the brown yarn, making sure to pick up that grey yarn at the back. Now drop the brown yarn and complete the row. We have 9 stitches to do in the main colour. We've reached the end of the row. We're going to chain 2 and turn the work. Now we need to half double crochet 9 stitches in the main yarn. Okay, so now we want to pick up the brown yarn. Oh, bring the grey to the front because we want to bring it to the wrong side of the work, which is the front in this case. And now we are going to be doing 6 half double crochets in brown. So we're going to pick up the brown, and again we have this staircase shape. It's only 1 stitch this time. So let's make sure we're holding that yarn with our thumb and middle finger to make sure it's nice and loose. The float, that is nice and loose. I'm going to tug this grey yarn, just tighten that stitch up a little bit. And now we yarn over and we go into the next stitch, picking up both that brown float and the grey yarn. And complete the stitch. And we want 6 in brown. So we've now reached that stitch, so we don't have to pick up that float anymore. We do have to continue picking up the grey yarn for the next 5 stitches. We now want to swap back to the grey yarn, so I'm going to drop the brown yarn and I'm going to pick up the grey yarn over the top of the brown yarn so they don't twist. I'm going to complete that half double crochet, crochet a half double crochet in the grey, then drop that grey over the top of the brown so they don't twist, complete the stitch in the brown, and then we have 2 in brown, picking up the grey yarn, and now we want to drop the brown underneath the grey, and we want to do 10 half double crochets in the main colour yarn until we get to the end of the row. Okay, so I've reached the end of row 6, so now we're going to be changing to the second way to do tapestry crochet. But before we do that, I just want to tell you the pros and cons of this method. So this is actually the wrong side of the work, and as you can see, it looks almost exactly the same as the right side of the work. So this technique is great for things like scarves and blanket squares, where you kind of want both sides of the work to look just as good as one another. One downside to this method is that you can sometimes see the yarn that you're carrying. So this section is supposed to all be grey, but you can see a little bit of brown sticking through. So with this method, it can kind of muddy up the pattern, and it might not look as clear as if you were doing the second or third way of tapestry crochet, which I'm about to show you. So now I'm going to show you the second way to do tapestry crochet. So we're going to start row 7 by chaining 2 and turning the work over. And we only have 3 half double crochets in the main colour until we change to the brown. Okay, so here we have a very long float to pick up. So we're actually jumping into the deep end of this second way to do tapestry crochet here. So I've done 3 complete stitches where I was supposed to leave 3 on the hook, 3 loops on the hook. So I'm going to undo that last stitch and just redo that half double crochet, not pulling through that final loop. And we're going to change to the brown yarn. This is exactly the same as we were doing before. We want to leave it loose so we have the ability to trap this yarn in between stitches, and we want to pull that through. Now we want to do 6 half double crochets in brown. We are going to be picking up both this float and both this working yarn, but we are going to alternate which one we pick up. So this first one I'm going to pick up the brown float. So yarn over, go through the stitch, picking up that brown at the back, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. Now the second stitch, we're going to go through the stitch, but we're going to make sure the brown yarn is underneath the hook, the float, and then we're going to make sure the grey yarn is on top of the hook, and we're going to yarn over with the working yarn and pull through. Now the next stitch we want to pick up the float, so we're going to make sure the grey yarn is not being picked up but the float is. So you go into that stitch and make sure the float is on top of the hook and half double crochet. That makes 3, and we're going to go back to picking up the grey working yarn, 4, pick up the float, 5, pick up the grey working yarn, 6. Now we need to do 1 stitch in the grey, so yarn over and complete that stitch, and now we want to crochet into this stitch and we don't want to pick up the working yarn or the float. And now we want to swap back to the brown, and we have 3 stitches in brown. So now we don't have any floats. Basically we want to capture the working yarn of the opposite colour with every other stitch. I usually like to start on the second stitch, so I would not capture it, then capture it, and then not capture it for this row of 3 browns. But as you can see, the third stitch is actually grey, and when there is a stitch of the same colour of the one that I'm capturing, I like to make sure that the capture lands on that stitch. So rather than doing don't capture, capture, don't capture, I'm actually going to do capture, don't capture, capture, so that the grey lands on the grey stitch. So capture that grey yarn, now don't capture it, and now capture it. I just like to do this so that on these stitches where it's the same colour as the working yarn, you won't even be able to see that you've captured anything at all. Again, I've completed that stitch, which I wasn't supposed to, so let me just undo that and pick up those 3 loops. And now we have 5 half double crochets in the main yarn. Now this is all brown, so what I'm going to do is capture the yarn on every even stitch. So on the first one, I'm not going to capture it. On the second one, I am going to capture it. On the third one, I'm not going to capture it. On the fourth one, I am going to capture it. And on the 5th one, I'm not going to capture it. Now we need to change back to brown for 2. So if we look at the work, I have a brown stitch come up and a grey stitch. So I'm definitely going to be capturing the grey yarn on the grey stitch. So go into that second stitch in brown, capturing the grey at the back. Now as you can see, I haven't been paying attention to which way I'm picking up the yarn, and I've got this twist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that as I'm picking up yarn, I'm going to be untwisting. So let's complete that stitch. And now we just have to do 7 stitches to get to the other end of the work. And because we have no more brown stitches, we're just going to leave the brown yarn at the back of the work. Okay, now row 8. Chain 2 as always and turn the work. The first 6 stitches are just in the main coloured yarn. Then we have 1 stitch in brown. So I'm going to pick up this yarn, and I've got a tiny float here. So you saw that I just pulled that loose because I didn't add my finger on it. So if you end up pulling it too tight, just pull it out a bit with your fingers like that. And I'm going to pick up the float but not the working yarn. Okay, so I'm going to bring the brown to the back and pick up the grey, complete that stitch. And now we have to crochet 8 in the main coloured. So we're going to crochet the first one without picking up the brown yarn. Then the second one, we're going to make sure that brown yarn is going above the hook and capturing it. And then don't capture for 3, capture for 4, don't capture for 5, capture for 6, don't capture for 7, and capture for 8. Now we're going to change back to the brown, so bring that to the front, complete the stitch in brown, and we have 6 in brown, and we have 1 grey stitch which is on the 3rd stitch. So rather than doing every even stitch, I'm actually going to do every odd stitch for this bit. For number 1, we're going to capture the grey. Number 2, we're going to miss the grey. Number 3, capture the grey. Number 4, miss the grey. Number 5, capture the grey. And number 6, miss the grey. And now we're going to change back to the grey yarn. And we have no more colour changes in this row, so we're just going to work 6 half double crochets in the main colour to get to the end. Chain 2, turn the work, 7 half double crochets in the main colour. We are now working into this brown section for the final grey half double crochet, but the brown yarn is coming out here where we did our final brown half double crochet on the last row. So because we're only going into this brown by 1, I'm not going to capture this yarn. But if we were going to go in it by 2, 3, 4, you'd want to capture this yarn every other one going into it. So say rather than I just had to go into this brown by 1, I had to go in by 3, I'd want to capture this yarn, then not capture it, and then capture the yarn, so that when we change to the brown now, it would be just there rather than being all the way over there and leaving a long float. Obviously I don't have to do this for this row, so I'm just going to undo those 3. And because we're only going 1 stitch into the brown, I'm actually not going to bother capturing it at all. Okay, drop the white, or the grey as it might be known. And we want to do 5 half double crochets in brown, capturing the grey on every even stitch. So capture it for 2, capture it for 4, and this is number 5, we're not going to capture it. So I've picked up my grey yarn, and now we don't actually have any more brown in this row, and in the following row the brown doesn't start until around this point anyway. If in the next row they had brown around here, I would continue to carry this at the back of the work even though there was no brown in this row, just so that this brown would be roughly around where I wanted it to be for the next row to pick it up. But the next row the brown is around here anyway, so I'm just going to drop the brown, and I'm going to do 7 half double crochets just in the white, or grey as it's also known. So now we get to add the orange for the little red breast, and this is actually a scrap left over from when I made my scarf. So we're going to do 2 half double crochet stitches in the orange, and we do want to pick up this grey yarn because we've got grey coming up again, and I'm going to do it on the odd number here because we've only got 2 in orange and we've got a grey stitch and a brown stitch, so I want to match up that grey with that grey stitch. I just think it makes it look nicer. So that's 1, and there's 2, and change back to the grey yarn, and we don't have any more orange or any other colour, so we're just going to do grey until we get to the end. I think I've shown you enough of how to do this second way of tapestry crochet for you to be able to do it yourselves now. So I'm just going to do the next 2 rows off camera, and then I'm going to give you a few pros and cons of this technique. Okay, so I've just completed row 11. So with this technique, you can see you're getting these little bumps in the back of the work where we're carrying the yarn. So this technique isn't so great for if you want to have both sides of the work visible, such as a scarf or perhaps a blanket. But there is a benefit to this technique because, in my opinion, it makes the colour that you're carrying at the back of the work a lot less visible than when you just carry it completely. So it doesn't muddy up the pattern so much. So I like to use this technique for things such as perhaps a bag or an item of clothing where you don't need to see the back of the work, but you don't want long floats to be getting caught on things. Okay, so for the next 4 rows, we're going to do the third way that I like to do tapestry crochet. And this is very much like Fair Isle knitting, where you are just leaving floats at the back of the work. So I'm going to chain 2 and turn the work. And we have to crochet 6 in the main colour. Sorry, I lied, we only have to crochet 4. So that's 3 and 4. And now we're going to bring the grey to the front of the work and pick up the orange. In this method we are just leaving floats in the back of the work, but because these next 2 stitches are grey, I am actually going to pick up this grey yarn because it's best to have less floats, and if the colour is matching the stitch, you're not going to see it anyway. So let's do those first 2 stitches with the grey yarn. And now we still have 4 more stitches to do in orange, but this is not grey, so I'm actually going to leave the grey yarn. I'm just going to leave it there. I'm not going to pick it up at all now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to drop the orange yarn, and we have 7 stitches in brown. We want to be using this grey yarn again on this side of the work, and I want to minimise the length of my floats as much as possible, so I am actually going to capture again this grey yarn just here where I can. So I'm going to pick up the grey yarn, not the grey, the brown, and I'm going to half double crochet into the next 2 stitches, picking up the grey yarn as I go. So like I said before, if you can pick up a float because it's the same colour as the stitch you're going into, then you should. For the next 5 brown stitches, I'm not going to be picking up anything because we're going into brown stitches. 4 and 5. Okay, and now the rest of the row is in the main colour, so we're just going to drop that brown. And again, we don't want to be crunching up the work here, so I am making sure that float is slightly loose, and I'm holding over my middle and thumb finger, does that make sense? My middle finger and thumb, and then we're going to do half double crochet to the end of the row. So now we're going to chain 2 and turn the work, and I'm just going to show you one more row because this way of doing tapestry crochet is the simplest, and I don't think I need to bore you with showing you how to do all 4 rows. My voice just breaking there embarrassingly. Let's do 11 in the main colour. So I'm going into this brown yarn for the 11th. I might as well pick up the brown working yarn because it's the same colour. Okay, now change to the brown. We have no white in this row until we get to the final few stitches, so we're going to have a very long white float here, and that's just the way it is when you're doing this method. So you want 6, 1, 6, drop the brown yarn, pick up the orange for 2 stitches. So we want 2 stitches in orange, pick up the brown, and we're just not capturing anything. Oh, I suppose we could capture the orange here, might as well. I think it's the same colour as the stitch below it. Drop the brown, and we have 2 in orange again. Drop the orange, pick up the brown. This is just the little beak of the guy. And now we have a nice long white / grey float at the back. Make sure it's not scrunchling up the word. Scrunchel is definitely a word, right? Scrunchling up the work, I should say. Should I say that? Did I say that? We've now reached the end of the row. Here you can see the long floats. So I'm just going to complete the work, and then I will get back to you with my final thoughts and opinions on these 3 ways of doing tapestry crochet. So I've completed my work. Let's look at it from the back. So don't mind my tail ends there. Just ignore those. You need to weave those in. So for this final way of doing tapestry crochet, obviously you end up with a lot of long floats at the back. So this isn't any good for something that you want to see both sides of, like a scarf or a blanket. And it's not really any good for a bag, because this is going to get caught when you put things in the bag, unless you put a lining in your bag, and then this is fine. So I would use this technique for something like a cushion, where the inside is always going to be trapped, so this is never going to get caught. Or if you want to do a blanket and do 2-sided squares where you sandwich them together and perhaps crochet around the edges, this float technique would be perfectly fine. And the great thing about the float technique is that you get absolutely no peek through of the coloured yarn, so you get very clean colours. So that's it for tapestry crochet. I've got loads of great ideas for tapestry crochet projects which will be coming out in 2024. If you found this video useful, please leave a like, and if you want to see more videos like this in the future, consider subscribing. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!